Hello, and welcome to the Pepperbird Magazine. Did you know that the Pepperbird Magazine has been in existence for over 25 years, and we're still going strong? I invite you to take an ad on our internet magazine, which is very, very useful during COVID days. So please, give us a call. We'll come and have a quick chat with you and video you and your business. Look at the number below.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, men and women. Welcome to Attorney Commander Galpohkpa Chesson Talk Show. Today, I have a special guest with me. I hope I didn't say good morning. This is good evening. I started my show. I did my show this morning, and I have my special guest on now. And before I bring her on, I hope you all had the opportunity to check her out on the internet. Margaret STEELE. She's an amazing woman. And I will take a break, and when I get back, my guest will be on. It will be ready to start. Hello, I have with me the amazing Margaret STEELE. How are you, Margaret?
I'm fine. Thank you so much for having me on your show. And thank you for that flattering introduction. I will try to live up to your flattering introduction.
Yes, I'm so pleased to have you with me this morning. I mean, I always say this morning, but I do my show in the morning.
It's morning somewhere.
Yeah, I did it this morning. Margaret, you're such an amazing woman. And every time I talk about you, I don't know how to introduce you because you're a historian, an author, a magician, a musician, an entertainer, a performer. I can know where to start. So please take a few minutes and tell my viewers who Margaret STEELE is.
Well, you basically just covered it, but yes, I'm a former professional musician and currently a magician and historian, magic historian. And my proudest achievements and what I'm working on mostly now is discovering forgotten magicians who were important in their day but have been forgotten by history. My first magician that I have rediscovered, she was already famous, but she was not as well known as she should have been. Her name was Adelaide Herman, and she was known as the Queen of Magic. She was the first really successful female magician. And when she died in 1932, her memoir disappeared. It just never surfaced until 78 years later in 2010, and it happened to come to me. I was looking for it because I was searching for her, and I published her memoir, which is right here. It's the first book I published, and since then, her memory has been restored. A number of graduate theses have been written on her. A children's book, several plays. Even tonight, I'm going to go see a Zoom show presented by two female magicians who are doing a tribute to her. So that's what I'm really concentrating on now, is finding these important but forgotten magicians and writing about them and bringing them back to life.
How do you talk about Herman? That name sounds familiar when it comes to magic.
Yes.
Is she related to the great Herman the Great?
She was the wife of Herman the Great. And yes, and he, if we hadn't had Houdini, Herman the Great would be the magician we would remember as the greatest magician. He was the greatest magician of his time, but he was just a little bit before Houdini, although they did cross paths a couple of times. But he was the greatest magician of his time, and she was his assistant. But in 1896, in the middle of a tour, they had a private rail car. In the middle of a tour, he had a heart attack and passed away. And instead of retiring, she kept the show going herself. She stepped up to become the lead of the show, and that's how she became a magician. And she continued to perform for another 30 years. So she is part of the dynasty of Herman magicians. Her husband was Herman the Great. His older brother was a magician. Their father was a magician. And then when Herman the Great passed away, his nephew took his place. And he also is known as Herman the Great. So
wow.
I'll probably thoroughly confuse you if we start talking about all of them. But that's my area of specialty, is these incredible magicians, the Herman dynasty.
So that what makes you so amazing, Margaret.
Thank you.
You come from greatness too. Now, Margaret, while talking about you, I don't know really how to introduce you. As I said, you taught me my first magic trick when you were here with us, and that hasn't left me. That's the only magic trick I ever learned and know.
I can't remember which trick I taught you.
I can't perform it because I don't have the tools. So, when we're talking about you, Margaret, where can we begin? Can we begin with your historical research about Black history?
Sure.
Because when you talk about Herman the Great, it connects to your story about Nova Scotia, about Canada, and all of that.
Right.
So can you take some time and
sure
begin telling us about where you started?
Well, during my studies of Adelaide Herman and Herman the Great, I realized that there were a series of assistants in the show, young Black assistants. They were usually teenagers when they started, and they played a very important role in the show. They were given the name Boomski. But Boomski was a comic character, but he was actually a very, very skilled assistant. And as I started studying them, I realized that almost nothing had been written about them, even though several of these young men went on to major careers as magicians themselves, at least 6 of them, because they worked with Herman the Great and his successor, Adelaide Herman, and the other Herman the Great, over the course of 40 years. So, of course, as they aged out of their role, they were replaced by another young man. So this series of young men were playing this character, Boomski. And I realized that nothing was written about them, but they were very important. So I started researching them. And in my research, I discovered that one of them had emigrated to Canada, to Nova Scotia, Canada, and he was a very important figure in the world of magic. His name was Isaac Willis, and he became a magician himself, known as the Great Boomski. So that brought me to Canada and started researching him and his place in history as well. So in order to tell his story accurately and fully, I needed to start studying Black history in Canada as well. So of course, I am not a qualified or appropriate spokesperson for Canadian Black history, because all I know about Canadian Black history is as it refers to this gentleman and his place in the world of magic. But the little that I do know will be completely new to the magic world and the magic audience, and I think they'll be very interested in it.
Yeah, because yeah, you dealt a lot with Bomsky, the great Bomsky, Isaac
Yes.
Willis, and in the Nova Scotia, the Halifax Today newspaper, you published an article for Valentine's Day.
Yes.
It's a
Yes.
love story. Can you tell us
It's a love
about that
story.
story?
Well, Isaac Willis, the great Boomsky, toured with Herman the Great for a number of years before becoming the great Boomsky himself, a magician himself. And he was working with a company called Richards and Pringle's Famous Georgia Minstrels. It was an all-black company, very popular. They had performed for 28 years. They had even performed for Queen Victoria in London. And they came to Canada. And they were touring in Nova Scotia. And he had been touring with them for 2 years, straight through, no breaks. They lived on a rail car. The whole troupe lived on their own private rail car where they slept, they ate, they traveled, they went to a different city every night. But when they were on this tour in July of 1905, they were in the city of Halifax, Nova Scotia for 4 days. And right down the street from the Academy of Music where the company was playing, their show was incredibly popular. They sold out every night. It was a big party. Their show was just incredibly fun and wonderful and entertaining. Right down the street from the Academy of Music where they were playing was the government house, where the official of the province of Nova Scotia lived. And sweeping the steps of the government house when Isaac Willis walked by was this lovely young woman that he decided he needed to meet. Her name was Blanche Stoutley. And this is what my story is about, how Isaac Willis met Blanche Stoutley, invited her to his show, and even though he had to leave 3 days later, he couldn't get the memory of her out of his mind. And as soon as his contract ended a few months later, he headed right back to Halifax, where he stayed for the rest of the fall. And he basically never left. He realized a good thing when he saw it. And so, so a couple of years later, they were married, and he emigrated to Canada. And he did very, very well. He had a very good life here.
Before we go any further, I would be remiss not to mention that the great Isaac Bomsky is the grandfather of my wife, Karen McLaurin.
Yes, yes.
And I was fortunate to meet Margaret. She was doing this book on the great Bomsky. And Karen had a picture of him here.
Yes, beautiful picture.
Everybody contacted us. She wanted that picture.
Yes.
And that picture, I took the picture of Karen. And you have that picture with you, Margaret?
I do. I have the restored version. Yes. I have it right here. Can you see it?
Hold on, let me bring you for. Yes, that's the picture.
Yes.
Oh, Lord. That's Karen's grandfather.
Yes.
My wife, Karen McLaurin.
Yes.
That's Isaac Willis, and that picture is in our house here. Margaret came for it, and that's how I met the great Margaret STEELE. She came to get the great Bomsky, and I met the great Margaret.
This is a very important piece of magic history right here, because it was very, very rare, almost unheard of for a Black magician to have a poster, a lithograph that was this detailed and this special. So it just shows you what an important magician he was.
Wow.
Yes. Yes.
And what's
I don't know
that?
if you can see. Can you see the hands that are doing magic up above, all around the edges?
Yes. And
Yes.
what's the top of the top? What's the name of the ringling?
Richards and Pringle's Famous Georgia Minstrels. That's the show he was with when he came to Halifax.
Ah.
Yes. Yes. So he was important enough to get his own poster.
Wow, that's great.
Yes. Yes. And they're very elegant. He in this picture, he looks a lot like Herman the Great. because Herman the Great was his teacher. And the gentleman who played Boomsky, including Isaac Willis, I have more pictures of him here. I have a photograph of him here doing magic as well. The young men who played the character Boomsky were Herman the Great's only students. He never taught anybody else. So the only people that had this knowledge and these skills were these young men, and they were the only ones who could pass it along to the rest of the magic community. So that's another reason they were very, very important in the magic world, and why it's so incomprehensible that they were just forgotten and their names were not in any books. So we're going to make
all of this back to life.
Exactly.
And this will make you a Canadian historian too.
Well,
he immigrated from America.
Minimal. I mean, I don't want to. There's so many people.
Where did he immigrate from?
Well, he was born in Virginia, and but by the time he was a small baby, his parents had moved to Washington, D.C. He was born in 1879 on Christmas Eve. And when he was discovered by Herman the Great, he was a messenger at the White House. His father was a doorman at the White House. His father, John Willis, was a doorman at the White House, and young Isaac was, I think he had a lot of personality, a lot of spunk. And the other thing that made him very qualified for the job was that he was very small and he looked younger than he was, because Boomsky was supposed to look like a young boy, but many of the young men who played him were simply small and young looking. Isaac Willis was blessed with a baby face. He was very, so in some pictures, for example, in this picture here, I don't know if you can see, he's in his 20s, but he looks very, very young. Can you see him there?
Is that him sitting down?
No, he's wait a minute. No, that's Herman the Great sitting down.
Herman the Great seated down there.
There he is. See him there?
Yes, I see him. Yes, I see him.
And there's another man in this picture that became very famous. This man here, that young man. Do you know who that is? That is Jesse L. Lasky, who, with standing next to his sister, they played the cornet or the trumpet in the show. They had a trumpet act, but he later on went on to become the founder of Paramount Pictures.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and his sister, whose name was also Blanche, married a man named Sam Goldfish, who changed his name to Sam Goldwyn, and with Louis B. Mayer formed Metro Goldwyn Mayer. So you have the beginning of so you have Isaac Willis there with two of the most influential people in the history of motion pictures.
Wow. And that's Herman the Great in the middle there. That's Herman the Great in the middle.
That's Herman. That's the second Herman the Great.
Okay, that's it. Okay,
that's the nephew that replaced the. This picture has to be from 1903 in the spring, because you see this. I mean, if you want to get really detailed, this man here was the manager of the company. His name was Edward Thurnauer, and actually, his signature is on a letter that Karen also has, a reference letter that Herman the Great gave Isaac Willis to help him on his journeys as a professional magician himself. Yes, but this is the nephew of Herman the Great, so it's confusing. They're two Herman the Greats, but they were both great.
Wow, that's amazing, Margaret.
Mm-hmm.
So, Margaret, how does all of this history with Boomsky relate to the what they call the place in Shelburne, Massachusetts, Shelburne, Canada?
Oh, the Shelburne, yes. At the Loyalist Heritage Center, is that what you're?
Yes.
Yes. Well, it relates indirectly. For people who don't know, my knowledge of Canadian Black history is still very limited, but I knew nothing before starting to study Isaac Willis, the Great Boomski. So Black Canadian history, I'm American, I'm not Canadian. So Black Canadian history is very different from Black American history in that Canada's population includes many descendants of the Black Loyalists. And because the Black Loyalists, for people who don't know, because I know that many Americans don't know this. They know
Yes.
the just the term loyalist, but they don't know exactly who they were. But the Loyalists were, most of them were enslaved people who fought for the British in the American Revolution in exchange for passage to Canada, and in most cases for a grant of land and their freedom. So there were, I'm not sure how many, but at least 1,000. See, I'm not sure, I'm showing how much I don't know, but they came and settled in Canada. And so you have Black communities in Canada whose roots go back almost 250 years. And those were the Loyalists.
Those were Blacks that fought for the British during the
They fought for the
Revolutionary
British
War.
in the Revolutionary War, the American Revolution.
When we won them, they took all their Blacks from America to Canada, Nova Scotia.
Yes, they rewarded them with for fighting for the British. It was a good deal for them because they were able to escape slavery that way. So that's a very old and distinguished population in Canada, especially in Eastern Canada and especially in Nova Scotia. So that's what you're talking about at the Loyalist Heritage Center in Shelburne. So because Isaac Willis was from Virginia, he was not related to the Loyalists, but his wife was. His wife, Blanche Stoutley, through her father, he was descended from the Loyalists. So all of Isaac Willis's children and grandchildren are definitely descended from Loyalists. So he was definitely part of that, but not directly.
Including Karen too.
Including Karen. Oh yeah, she's descended from Loyalists.
And you know, Margaret, the funny part about the Black Loyalists, the British founded Sierra Leone in Africa for them.
Right.
And took them to Africa because Nova Scotia was too cold and the living conditions there were too bad. They were living in the ground and all during the winter. And Liberia was founded by Americans from the north.
Right, exactly.
And we are neighbors in Africa. The Sierra Leoneans and the Liberians, we are neighbors.
Yes.
And we are like brother and sister children, but we don't even know each other because of the Civil War.
That's too bad.
Both of those countries are African American people settled in those countries.
Yes.
So I was just in Sierra Leone a few years back, and with the knowledge I've learned from Canada and all the places when I went to Sierra Leone, I could see the resemblance, the vernacular, almost
really?
In Liberia.
Huh? How interesting.
Yeah, I could see the facial people with their face, that African American structure. It's in Liberia too. Most of the people I saw in Sierra Leone, especially the business people, you could tell that they were not from that area too.
Huh? How interesting.
Yeah, you can see them, and they're the people that maintain the British system.
They struggled when they got there. They struggled terribly.
The first country that the British set up as the administrative capital of the British colony. And that's why the first college of the British Empire, called Four Bay College, is in Freetown, Sierra Leone.
Wow.
That was the administrative headquarters for the British Empire. So all this history was just amazing to me, and thinking about the Black Loyalists and how they live. So he didn't really have any connection with the Black Loyalists.
Well, only through marriage.
Okay. But what's his name in the book of names?
I haven't looked directly. I believe that that his wife's father's name Stoutly may be in there.
I think Karen found one of their names there. I think yes,
Yeah, it wouldn't. Isaac Willis wouldn't be there, but I believe Stoutly might be. Something to look up.
Just to clarify, could you tell us what the Book of Names is?
Well, you should ask somebody who's an expert in Nova Scotia history. I believe it's just a list of the loyalists who came to Nova Scotia, and I'm not exactly sure of the year, but it's in the late 18th century, the late 1700s. So it's just a list, but it has some more information too. It has, it describes them and, some of their professions and what their possessions were and their background. So it's not, it's not a narrative. It doesn't tell a story. It's just a list of the people. But because of that, it's a very, very valuable document.
Yes, because when we went to Shelburne to see the center, I kept hearing about this Book of Names, Book of Names. I thought it was some mystical book,
Yeah, right. And it's a list.
It's a list of all the slaves that they had, the people who, and the description, some bad description of markings on their bodies and all of that.
Yeah, but it's a very important piece.
Yes, and I hope people visit Shelburne, Nova Scotia.
I would like to very much. I've been in Nova Scotia here doing research during the pandemic, but of course it's been impossible to visit places.
So is that your book is done? Did you do a book on Boomsky?
My book on Boomsky, there's the manuscript up there. It's finished. It's in the editing phase now. So it's written. It's in the editing phase, and it will be designed and made to look like a real book. And as soon as we finish the editing, we can start working on getting it actually made into a book. It will be out sometime this year, but we don't have an exact publication date. You will be the first to know.
Yeah. You did a book on Herman the Great too, right?
The only other book I have is this one, the one on Adelaide, her memoir, but it's mostly about Herman the Great. It's more about her husband than it is about her. Okay. So my book on Boomsky has a lot more about her in it than has been told before. But it's mostly about the young men who played Boomsky. I have found, before I started this book, I only knew the name of one of them, and now I have the names of 10 of them. And several of them I have a pretty good history of, but there are two of them, Isaac Willis and another man named Milton Hudson Everett, and they were the two most important Boomskys. And what's really interesting is that their paths were so different. They came from such different backgrounds, and they ended up in such different places. But they did the exact same role, and they were both very, very good at this role. And so it's very interesting and fun for me to follow them in their divergent paths. So Isaac Willis ended up in Truro, Nova Scotia, with a beautiful piece of property and a beautiful wife and family and many, many descendants. And he was a upstanding citizen in Truro for 25 years and business owner, and he had a very successful post-magic career and left a great legacy in so many descendants and so much, having built so much in the town of Truro. Milton Hudson Everett stayed with Adelaide Herman until her death in 1932. And then he was part of the Harlem Renaissance. So he brought his family up from Georgia, and he was there from the very beginning of the Harlem Renaissance. So, and later became After she died, he worked at the post office in New York for many years. And so he started out practically indigent with his family in Georgia. And they were sharecroppers, cotton pickers. And he was picking cotton one afternoon in October 1891. And he was on the Herman train that night, and he never looked back. He was 13 years old. And he snuck into the show. He didn't really sneak in. He went to try and work backstage at the show because there was no way he could afford a ticket. He sometimes worked at the theater. And at that point, Herman the Great was looking for a boomski. His previous assistant hadn't worked out. Sometimes he would hire these young teens, these 12 and 13-year-old boys, and they'd join the company. They would be all excited, and then they would be just so lonely and so lost, and so they just couldn't handle it. It was a lot to be taken from your family. They would freeze like a deer in the headlights, or they'd run away, or they couldn't figure out the show. So he needed someone. He asked this young boy if he would dance for him. He danced for him. He said, "Would you like to come with the show?" The boy said, "Yes." And he said, "Go get your things. Go get your parents so they can sign." He went and got somebody else. He didn't get his parents. He didn't want to tell his parents because he was afraid they'd say no. And he was on the train that night, and he stayed with them for 40 years, off and on.
So, what was so significant about Isaac Willis from the other boomskis?
Oh, well, first of all, he took the name Boomski for his own act. So that was one thing that made him very significant. Another thing is that he never got into any trouble. Some of the other ones got into big trouble. They were young and they were away from home for the first time. So there was a lot of backstage gambling. They were from poor families, and this transformed their families, but they would see how the Hermans lived in this luxurious lifestyle, and some of them just succumbed to temptation, and they there were some that got involved in some thefts. The Hermans would forgive them, actually, because they understood that it was very hard for a young boy on the road. Both the Hermans, both Adelaide and her husband Alexander, who the first Herman the Great, had been child performers themselves. They had left home very, very young. Alexander Herman had been 8 years old when he went off on the road with his older brother and learned the assistant role. The assistant role that Boomski did was actually the same role that Herman the Great did when he was a boy. So he taught them his assistant role because the role was really important in making the magician look good. So once he knew how to make the magician look good, he wanted an assistant that could do the same thing. But if you have a child, he's not suspected. People don't think that a child can do all of these skilled magic things. And that was part of Boomski's power. He was Herman's secret weapon because he was doing all sorts of stuff that the audience never suspected because they didn't think a young kid could do all of this stuff. But if you've ever spent time with children, you know that they are capable of a lot of things. So Isaac Willis was just a very upstanding, energetic, had a great work ethic, and was just really good at being very present on stage and knowing exactly what his boss, the magician, needed at any given moment. He was right there. He was there before he was asked to do anything. He just knew what he was doing. So he was a very, very valuable assistant and incredibly trustworthy. And they knew they weren't going to have to, you know, drag him out of the clutches of the gambling crew.
Mother, so first of all, I want to thank you ever so much for taking the time to write up on the Boomskis. You brought a whole different light to the Black performing arena, other than just the blackface and the minstrels and stuff like that, you know, and bringing out Boomski and his performances, and especially Auntie Willis being related to my wife Karen, make it so fulfilling and significant. And I want to thank you again for recognizing me for the picture I took of her and her grandmother.
That was a wonderful picture.
Yeah, I appreciated that. And thank you very much. You have done such a great thing. And although you're not into Canadian history, but you touch on a significant part of Canadian history that relates to the Black community of Nova Scotia.
Mm-hmm.
And that's significant. And I want to thank you for that again. So moving on to your other aspects, you're a magician, musician, and can you tell us that before I get into your expose, your show you did, the first show I saw you, that really blew my mind. Can you tell about your magicianship and your musicianship?
Well, you know, when I was very young, I was lucky enough to get accepted to Juilliard. So I was able to go and study with the most incredible musicians in the world. And I've had some really wonderful experiences as a musician. When I was 16 years old, I got to play with Duke Ellington. Yeah, I was just in the orchestra backing him up, but I was 6 feet away from him. So that was really, really incredible.
What instrument did you play?
I played the oboe.
Wow.
Yeah. And I backed up Dizzy Gillespie and Judy Collins. And Rod Stewart, I played with Rod Stewart at Madison Square Garden. And if you go on YouTube, I'm in this video. You'll have to look for me, but I'm there. I'm right in the center. I did a music video with Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey. It's for the animated movie, the theme song, When You Believe. So if you look up When You Believe with Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey, I'm this little dot in the back. But it's there. I'm there right in the center in the back. You'll see me. So those experiences were, you know, I didn't know any of these stars, but just being in their presence and watching them and experiencing their energy just shows you what it takes for somebody to be a star at that level. There's so much, there's an aura about them that you don't feel with most people. There's a reason that they're stars.
Wow.
And then in the magic world, I've been very lucky to be able to work with very top magicians. For the Boomski project, it's very eagerly anticipated in the magic world because this is new information, especially among the Black magicians. They are cheering me on and they call me and they say, "Is it ready yet? Can we see it?" So that's really exciting. One of my great supporters has been David Copperfield, who opened up his library to me and shared photos with me and pictures. This image is from David Copperfield's collection. This is Herman the Great and Boomski. And yes, so you can just you get a real idea about the assistant in that. You know, he's got his arms crossed, he's confident, he's relaxed, he's necessary, he's the trick doesn't work without him. So and then my as far as stars of magic, the person I'm closest with, I don't know if you've ever seen the Carbonaro Effect on TV. It's a wonderful magic show. Well, Michael Carbonaro is an old friend of mine. I've worked with him for years. I just consulted on a Zoom show he just did called Live from Space. he'll be doing that again. So I've worked with him. I've known him since he was 17. Even when he was 17, we would always say, "You're going to be a star," because we knew it then. He's a wonderful, sweet human being. It's just when you do meet people that are at that level, some of them have some issues, but there are some incredible humanitarians and wonderful people out there.
Yes, I always watch his show.
He's great, right?
I saw one show where he was cracking this woman cat, cracking the dog, and the woman was so hysterical. You could hear the dog go, crack, 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 and she was just like, ah, ah. That was one of the funniest shows I saw.
I know. He's just like that. He's always been so clever, and he's a trained actor. Yes. That's what makes the difference with him. So he just gets in the scene. He never lets down. He never, breaks character.
But Margaret, when I met you, I went and saw one of your performances with the colors. What you call that?
Oh, okay. Yes, the cornucopia of
cornucopia.
Yes.
Margaret, you're a star too.
Hmm?
You're a star.
That was one of Adelaide Herman's tricks. So I really love bringing back to life not just the history, but also the actual magic that they did.
Wow, that blew my mind.
Thank you.
Yeah, Margaret, you've done a lot of good work, and it's a pleasure for me to have you here.
Thank you so much.
About your experiences, and especially your historical research on the Bumskis. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. You're really amazing, and you're one of my superstars.
Oh.
Yeah, I was so happy to do this interview with you because you bring so much to the table, Margaret.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You have a world of talent. Before we close this interview, do you have anything you want to pass on to my viewers?
Well, I'd just like to say that I've learned so much as researching this book, and one of the things that's really hit home to me is that the history that we're taught in school is pretty much never the full story or even the true story. It's just the story that someone else wants us to hear. But now in the digital age, everyone can get the real story because we can go back and look at old newspapers and old genealogy, census records, which tell a story in themselves. So what I try to do is encourage people to actually do that, because when you go back and look at the newspapers of the day, and anybody can do that. You can go to the Library of Congress, and they have a project called Chronicling America. It's absolutely free, and you can see newspapers over the course of 150 years from all over the U.S. And there are other services that are either subscription services or are free through universities or government archives. And I just want to encourage people to go back and read the history from long ago the way it was told then, because then we start to get a true picture. And we can't change the future until we know the truth about the past. So that's my message.
Thank you very much, Margaret. And
Thank you.
It's so good for you to be here with me tonight. I want to extend my thanks and appreciation to you for accepting our invitation.
I appreciate your having me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much again, Margaret. And
thank you.
I love to have you back here so we can do a follow-up when you do your book.
Okay. I'm there. Just call.
Okay, so we'll have you back when you do your book. I'm sure I'll get a copy.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
Thank you again, Margaret.
Thank you very
And it
much.
was good having you here with us.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
evening.
Thanks, you too.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was my host. My guest, rather. I'm the host. My guest, Margaret Steele, the famous Margaret Steele. And I hope you all had a good opportunity to hear her, hear of her experiences, her book she's writing. And I hope you all will be looking out for it when it comes out so you can purchase it and read about Black people in Canada, our Black stars, Black musicians, magicians, performers. And I want to thank you all again for being here with us. This has been Lieutenant Commander Galpohkpa Chesson. Have a good evening.
Hello, and welcome to the Pepperbird Magazine. Did you know that the Pepperbird Magazine has been in existence for over 25 years, and we're still going strong? I invite you to take an ad on our internet magazine, which is very, very useful during COVID days. So please, give us a call. We'll come and have a quick chat with you and video you and your business. Look at the number below.
Soundstripe.